I'm sitting next to a red maple, Acer rubrum, that was collected by the father of a friend of mine. The tree's native to the United States and Canada. This one came from a swamp in Florida back in the early 80s. When most of the leaves turn color, as is the case here, I will go in and pull all the leaves off as the tree's just about to lose everything, and then I can do a little bit of pruning before the tree goes fully dormant for winter. Here's what this looks like. I'll typically start by simply cutting all of the leaves off, and I can either do that by simply snipping one leaf at a time, or when it's the case of a big long branch that I'm not too worried about the details, I can just strip all of the leaves off. The only thing I need to be careful of while doing this is that I don't damage any of these fine branches, and if I do think I'm going to damage them, I'll either support them with my other hand or I will come in and then cut the leaves one petiole at a time until the tree is totally bare. I tend to start work near the top of the tree so that as the leaves fall onto the lower branches, I don't need to pick them up again. So, I've been doing this job all day long on different trees, Japanese maples, trident maples, little dwarf wisteria or millettia, and now I'm doing this red maple, which is by far the most dramatic in terms of color. In the Bay Area, we actually don't get a lot of fall color on our Japanese maples, or really on anything in general. It's a small number of species that will reliably give us fall color every year. And so one thing I appreciate about the red maple is that it reliably produces color wherever it grows, which is pretty fantastic. As you can start to see, what's been growing underneath all of this foliage is that the older branches are a wonderful silver color and the fresh branches are a fairly bright red color. The red color of the new shoots versus the silver of the old shoots. If you're working with an old specimen or preparing a tree for show, what you want is for as many of these branches as possible to show that silver color, because it makes the tree look older. It actually is what the tree does as it ages, and so you want to be able to make the tree look as old as possible when you're showing it. While I'm doing this work, I'm kind of paying attention to where I'm getting long shoots, where I'm getting short shoots, where we have these big, long, more vigorous shoots versus these little teeny tiny bits of growth, as it's kind of giving me an idea about the tree's overall vigor. This tree was repotted twice in the last few years, and the arrangement between the trunks, this is actually 3 different trees together, has been kind of modified so that they look more attractive between them. And as that required removing a lot of soil, it involved a lot of stress on the roots. Now, luckily, these are very hardy trees and can get by with a quite aggressive root work. I avoid that, obviously, whenever possible, as it slows down the development of the tree. But in this case, it allowed us to rearrange the relationship between the trees to make it kind of a more attractive composition. Now, as these leaves come off, you'll start to see a little bit about the structure of the trunks, and you can see a lot of the characteristics of how these trees grow in nature. And when they're healthy, they grow really quickly, which means, as it does for all of the plants in the maple family, long, straight shoots. And so if you're working on a red maple and you want something other than long, straight shoots, it's going to involve a little bit of clipping growth, pruning along the way, and or wiring. Wiring is going to give the tree a very wired look, and I don't know that that's always sensible for the tree you're working on. It really depends on the look you're going for. But in this case, I kind of don't mind that, as I know the history of the tree is that it has grown out, the main trunks have died back, and it's grown out again multiple times. And so the kind of long, straight sections at the bottom of the tree have kind of show us what it did at that stage of development, and then the finer twigs show us what the tree produces as it gets into this more refined or more mature growth. I don't know that I feel the need to cut all of the trunks back to just little tiny stubs and make it a little teeny tiny forest, I don't know that that would be the best way to kind of serve the character the tree already has. But it's the kind of thing I think about is, what would give this the most kind of appealing look. And so you can see, at the bottom we got these big, long, straight sections that have yet to develop any character, and we have the old rotten trunks in the middle of these three trees. I guess this one is completely rotted and broken off the back. You can kind of see right there the base of that. The petioles, these kind of leftover stems at the base of the leaves, I could go in and remove those, but they'll dry up and fall away on their own. So for now, I mostly want to get the main part of the leaf off the tree so I can get an idea about what the tree's structure looks like, make some informed pruning decisions, and then I just know that those petioles will fall away in time. One nice thing about cutting the leaves away is that it allows you to cut the petioles fairly short and at a fairly uniform length, which will give the tree a nice look. So for a very refined specimen, I would take the time to go in and cut all of the leaves off because I would not want to break any of the branches, and I would want the tree to look as good as possible. And one way to do that is by making those consistent cuts all the way across it so that every branch has the same kind of look and feel. It can be distracting when you have different look and feel on different branches. I've had this tree for only, I guess, 3 years maybe. And it was in the care of my friend since really since it was collected in the early 80s. And so the tree's gone through a number of different designs or permutations over the years, and so I kind of look forward to seeing what's next. One fun thing about bonsai is that the more owners a tree has, the kind of more interesting the character of the tree becomes. And when a tree's worked on by one person, it can be a wonderful example of what one person would produce, but in the hands of different people over time, you can end up with some really fun characteristics that are far more unexpected. I've known for a lot of the trees that I've made from scratch, while it's very satisfying to work on a tree over very long periods of time, I actually really enjoy seeing trees that I maybe gave start to and then watch someone else do the latter stages of development, because I kind of have an idea what a tree will look like if I work on it over time, but I love being surprised by what other people come up with. As long as the tree gets to a really nice stage of development, I like to see kind of as much variety or diversity of design as possible. In terms of the vigor of these trees, when they're really happy, when they've got good roots, you can actually defoliate them several times during the growing season. Even in my climate, they can be fully defoliated 2-3 times in a year. But as I've been mostly wanting the tree to regain vigor after the big repots, I have done very little pruning during this season, and I removed no more than the largest leaves at a couple points during the year just to get enough light into the interior so that I wouldn't lose some of these lower branches, like the ones I'm working on right down here. If these get shaded out, then they just stop growing and can eventually die back. But just for a little idea, you can see if I just go to 2 different parts of the tree, this is kind of the natural variation in leaf size, where we have a little teeny tiny leaf and a great big leaf. That's not atypical for a red maple. And so I will go in occasionally during the year, pull out these big leaves, leave the small ones, and that will help balance vigor a little bit, but more importantly, it just lets light into the interior of the tree. So right now it's late November for me. We have yet to have much cold, or at least what passes for cold around here. And so the time of year I do this really depends on how much cold we've had. I just kind of follow what the leaves do. And when most have turned color, that's when I go ahead and do this. That can be mid-December, late December in really weird cases. A little bit, kind of about normal time this year. I think this is one of the very basic joys of bonsai, simply being able to play with leaves of different colors. I enjoy seeing the reds, a little bit of pink, orange, green. Very satisfying to see all the colors, especially growing up in a place that doesn't naturally get a lot of fall color. When I do the leaf pruning during the year, I exclusively do it by cutting the petioles, because the leaves, when they're healthy, hang on way, way better. As soon as the leaves start to turn, if the abscission layers properly formed, the petiole will separate and the entire leaf and leaf stem will come off, or it'll simply break at the base of the leaf where it meets the petiole. But if it is strongly connected, because it's in the middle of the growing season, then it's much more likely to break a branch. And so I will just go in and cut with a pair of scissors all the leaves that I want to take off. One thing I enjoy about seasonal maintenance work is that, bonsai gives you a lot of different kinds of work over the course of the year. Some of it is fairly intellectual when you're coming up with designs. Some of it's very technical when you are wiring or grafting, doing something that requires a lot more precision or forethought. Leaf removal just involves care, and that's why it's kind of a fun, not necessarily mindless task, but not a task that is very mentally taxing, which I kind of appreciate. Nice to get a break once in a while. As I get to other parts of the tree, it becomes easier to see leaves I've neglected to pull on the other side. There's kind of a big cluster of branches in the middle here, and so I actually proceed a lot more carefully when I don't know exactly what I'm grabbing is kind of connected to. I want to make sure that I'm stripping away leaves, for instance, from a more solid branch than from one of these really tiny ones. And also to make sure that the angle I'm pulling is in line with the branch rather than pulling the branch off to the side. That makes it much more likely to break. Another thing to do to exercise a little more caution is, instead of grabbing every single leaf all at once, is to just selectively pull some of the leaves off at the same time as opposed to all of them. So even though I'm running my hand across a branch, I might just pull a couple leaves, a couple more, and then a couple more, and I'll make several passes. That's another way to be a little more cautious or conservative in terms of going out of your way to protect the branches. When I'm working on really dense trees, I'll often use a pair of tweezers as it'll help me reach into the interior of the tree. But luckily for this one, the branches are fairly flexible and it's not too dense yet. Now, as you can start to see the overall size of the tree, you can start to ask questions about how large would an ideal silhouette be for the canopy. In other words, do we want the tree to get bigger, or is it a good size just as it is? If we want to maintain the size, then we need to create density within the silhouette, which means we'll need to cut back a little bit past where we are right now and then rebuild out from there. If we want it to get bigger, we can keep a lot of the structure we have and work our way out. All right. There we go. Let's see. A few odd and end leaves here and there, but that looks like it for the most part. The other thing I'll do at this time of year is take off any fertilizer that has remained. I often actually just save it and put it out on a conifer. I have a couple different kinds of organic fertilizer in here. The little plastic crates are really just for holding fertilizer. Nothing more to it than that, because the surface of the soil, or moss in this case, is sloped, and so it's very easy for fertilizer, pelletized organic fertilizer, to just roll off. So using the little cases can help keep it in place. And then just so the leaves don't kind of distract me as I'm working, I can grab a broom and do a little better job cleaning off the surface of the soil. For tiny leaves or cases where there's no moss as a top dressing and you just have loose soil particles, tweezers can work great for picking out the soil. There, and there we have it. Now, that's the least technical bit of what's happening. The next step is to do that little bit of kind of seasonal maintenance to prune the tree. And for that, I kind of come from your perspective and I look away from the tree and I look at the overall shape of the tree, the overall silhouette, and think about what kind of improvements I can make. And we can apply a couple different criteria to our cuts. One of the easiest is just to look for long internodes. And internodes are the distance between pairs of buds on the tree. And if we are trying to create really fine branching at the top, we want the internodes to be very small. And if we are working down lower, it's okay if the internodes are a little bigger. The other thing I'm going to look for is opportunities to remove large branches from the upper regions of the tree and maybe prefer some of the larger branches of the lower part. Because this is a fairly low branch on this, or branchlet from this branch right here on the right-hand tree, I want it to be a little bit thicker, and so that's why I let this grow all year long. If I wanted it to be a lot thicker, I could actually let this grow for a couple of years and really thicken up this whole region, but it's really not that far off of some of the larger trunks back here, so I can start shortening it. When I shorten it, the pairs of buds on these maples, it's an alternate pattern where you get a pair of buds one way and then a pair of buds the next way. And so every pair of buds will be in a different direction, kind of at 90 degrees from each other. So if I cut right here, we'll have a bud going once to each side. If I cut up here, we'll have one bud going out and one going in. If you never know where to cut, you can always start with the outer bud and then decide, is this too long for right here? And I'd say yes, plus the internode's enormous. That's a really long internode. Now I can ask, we've got a nice side-to-side bud distribution here, but it's a long way to the bud down below that. Now, this is harder to see, but there are some internodes that you can see the little tiny red buds popping out of the branch. It's always safe to cut there. In other cases, you'll just see a light brown ring where there's a theoretical node, but it won't necessarily pop a bud if you cut back to there. Knowing that this internode's too big for me, I want to shorten that. And while I'm at it, I'm going to remove this dead portion of the twig next to it. And then I've got 3 sections that are a little bit shorter. I'd actually like it to be even shorter. I can look from the front a little bit and bring it back just a little bit. And that way, if I get buds either in this region or this region, that'll help me build this front branch a little bit. One reason I'm a big fan of cutting away any dead twigs is, even if they're pretty, like this one here, I like to know what I'm dealing with, and I don't want to make decisions about what to keep or cut if I'm not clear about what's actually alive and going to contribute to the silhouette in the future. So I'm going to look around with opportunities to remove these dead twigs, as well as then shorten things that are too long or too heavy for that part of the tree. So we've got a new shoot up here. It's about 2.5 inches long. It's perfectly straight. If I cut down to here, I have made it a little bit shorter, but really cutting down to here will get me closer to the internode length I want. Now, I could bring it back even further and get rid of that straight section, because this little twig is parallel with that one. There's all these really subtle things I look for, and so I'm just going to shorten that all the way down to that, because that's giving me a little closer to the internode I want. Likewise, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 new nodes here. I can cut it back to there to get it the same height, but that looks silly, so I'm going to make it a little bit shorter, and that makes it more clear which the kind of top of the tree is right there. And so as I work, I can make these minor adjustments of where the new buds are coming out, and it'll give me a little bit of an ability to change kind of the flow of any given branch. This is probably my very favorite task in bonsai, is pruning on deciduous trees, because you can make a difference for the tree very quickly. With a small number of cuts, you can end up with something that looks very different than when you started. So as I'm making these cuts, I'm just trying to avoid overlapping branches while trying to work to improve density within a given area. A lot of these branches really overlap each other, and I can decide over time if I want to wire them, use guy wires, or some other means to just reposition the growth I already have. And I'm also very consciously going out of my way to not fix all of the problems at once. One thing about working with deciduous trees is that if I keep more growth than I need on the plant, then it'll help me get shorter internodes. Let me put that another way. If this whole tree had 12 branches on it, I'd expect them to be really vigorous. If it had 124 branches, I'd expect each to be really small. That's the case for pretty much every single species, and so I tend to be generous in the number of internodes I keep. And so it doesn't matter a whole lot if I work from top to bottom, left to right. I'm starting here because the chair was here. And I try to move around a lot so I can get a better perspective on the tree. If you just look from one angle all the time, you're actually much more likely to miss a lot of cuts that need to happen. Dead, dead, dead. Get rid of all the dead twigs. Or busy areas where we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different twigs in the same spot. Under no circumstance will I need all 5. I can start by removing the smaller 2. I can remove the one that's bent down. And then I can either decide to keep these 2 for now, or just make a decision, keep the further back one and cut the closer one. A lot of these interior twigs have died, which tells me that they did not get enough light during the year. And that's one of those examples, a great example of when you actually can cause more damage by not pruning than by pruning. And it's kind of a tough idea to internalize. You really have to go through it. But if you find yourself cutting away branches on the inside that you don't need, maybe not a problem. But if you find yourself cutting away branches that you would have preferred to have lived, then they're just not getting enough light. A lot of people say you can leave the branches that are dead if you're about to take them to a show. And I have mixed feelings about that. Yes, it may look like the tree has more density than it would otherwise. But if you are good at spotting dead branches from across the room, then it just makes it look like the tree isn't as healthy or well cared for. And I like it when show trees are as healthy as possible. So I do have a bias toward removing the dead tissue and preserving the live. If I get to any areas where I'd want to make larger cuts, I'll probably hold off on that until the early part of the growing season. I don't like making big cuts in winter because the cuts don't have a chance to start healing, at least in earnest, until the heart of the growing season. And so I will just kind of make a mental note that I need to come back and do a little more work the following spring, which is about the time when I would want to look into doing some of that leaf pruning, or rather removing the larger leaves that I'd mentioned. A lot of dead twigs in here, which is my other mental note, to come in and do a lot more leaf thinning during the season and or defoliate. When I defoliate, I'm not going to want to remove the weaker shoots. I'm just going to want weaker leaves from weaker branches. I will remove the leaves on the outer branches to give the weaker leaves on the interior of the tree a chance to catch up. Now that I've finished pruning the tree, I can take a little better look at what else needs to happen for there to be further improvements for the tree. And the main thing I noticed is that the main trunk is a little bit close to these two trunks around it, so I'd like to give it a little more space. And I'd like to move this trunk over here so it's not as in line with the trunk right behind it. By changing how the trunks are oriented in space will help it create a fuller, more balanced composition as opposed to jamming everything together all in the front. So I can do that not by putting individual wires on the branches or trunks, but by using some guy wires. And so the first one I'd like to move is this. And I'm going to do that by creating a new anchor point off to the side of the pot. And here's how I'll do that. I'll take just a small piece of copper wire with a little loop on the end. I'll put it into a drainage hole and then bend it around up around the edge so that I have something to tie the branch down to. And I want it somewhere in this area over here. I will be pulling right around here, and so I'm going to look for a drainage hole in this area. Let's see what I can find. There does happen to be a drainage hole roughly where I'd like it, and so I will just insert the wire in here at an angle, hook it around, and then bend it up roughly right where I want it. There's a lot of ways to do this. It's not an exact recipe. The main thing is that it ends up working for you. Now, as for the guy wire, I will take a piece of really slender aluminum or copper wire, in this case aluminum, and a tiny piece of aquarium tube. I will hook the tube onto the branch right where I want to make the bend, and I will twist it back on itself so that it will be secured from the top. And then I'll try to find the most clear path down to the anchor point that I've created right here. I'll come over to the other side so you can see that a little better as it comes down. So I want this to be over in this area, so it's kind of pulling away from this guy right here, and let's see if that works. Yeah, kind of like that. So I can adjust this later, but with a couple wraps I can at least kind of keep that in place while I then deal with this branch, which is now jammed into the trunk below it. I can move that closer to this trunk by putting another guy wire just between these two right here, just to give us that little bit of separation right there. This is not an ideal branch angle, and that's one reason why we recommend that the branch angles come out kind of more like this, but I'm not totally ready to cut that all the way off. And so for now, I'll just do another guy wire that just connect the two to each other like that. I'll do that with another piece of aluminum wire and some more of the tubing. I'm going to use two different kinds of tubing for this. On one end, I'm just going to use a normal piece of tubing. The other piece of tubing I'll use will allow me to make adjustments as I go. And so I'm going to make this twice as long, and so I'll make a loop that goes around the branch like this, and then there'll be another piece of plastic here that leaves these ends free so I can tighten it. I can test out where I want the bend to be by putting my finger where I expect the pulling to happen. So I'm just going to sneak the wire right where it needs to go. Test that that's where I want it to be. And then I can start hooking up the wire on the other side, the plastic on the other side. Now, so you can see the effect of this, I'll do it over here so you can watch as these two come closer to each other. And then by twisting, it'll hold it in place. Again, I'm going to go a little bit further than I eventually want to go, as I know that it'll relax a little bit when I let go. So I might even bring it a tiny bit more over so that if it relaxes a little bit when I take it off, we'll be fine. Now, you'll notice that this branch angle isn't great right here, so probably what I'll plan to do is cut off this inside branch and this guy right here, as that'll give me a little bit more space. And so as long as there are fewer branches in that exact area, then it seems a little bit less congested. Now, I don't like the way this curves back in. We don't have a lot going out that way. So what I might do is just shorten this for the time being, leave it for now, hope we get a bud around there. If not, we'll get a bud back there. And so that takes care of that one a little bit. I'll check from the front. If I want to come back and now lower the whole unit down, I can come back around and tighten that a little bit. And if I do the pulling with my hand, as opposed to just pulling on the wire, I can be a little bit more sure that I won't be surprised. You want to make sure that the weight you apply or the pressure you apply is applied where you want it. In other words, is the bend happening over the length of the branch? Is it all happening right here? Is this intersection right here going to be safe? When you do the bend by hand instead of just tugging on the wire, you can be a little more sure that, again, you don't get any surprises when you tug on the wire. Great. Now I'll come back from your perspective, take another look, see if that gets me closer to where I want to be, and it does. It also is making me think that these branches are a little bit horizontal, so it might be that in the future I can either cut back to some branches that grow upward, or I can use some wire to bend these up to fill in a little bit. I think that would look a little better. There. Now about these others, we can take a different approach to give some space here, and the absolute easiest way is by using a piece of bamboo or a chopstick to actually use as a physical spacer between them. And so I know I want this to come forward a little, and I know I want this one to come back. And so what I can do is actually look and see if there's a good spot where I can just use one item to do both of those jobs. And so that holds, so I can now come around to the front, see if that looks a little better. And that actually makes quite a bit of difference. It's not ideal, but again, now that I have an anchor point down here, if I wanted, I could pull this trunk over even further. Likewise, I could put another loop down here. And so there's multiple ways of doing it. Whether you like guy wires, you can run more guy wires, or whether you like using elements that are up in the tree, putting a little bit of discoloration on it or just letting the chopstick age will actually change the color so it doesn't stand out as much. The only other thing I might do is, if I do go with the chopstick approach, I might make it so that it's not cutting into the wood, and I can do that by creating cutting a very small piece of rubber or plastic that will protect the bark. And so I have a little tiny piece of rubber here, and I can literally just insert it right in between the chopstick and the branch. Make sure that side doesn't move. There's the one. And now to come back to the other side. And that's that. I'll want to check on this during the growing season to make sure that it's still in place or that it's not cutting in. If at any point in time I want to adjust this whole thing, I might use some additional guy wires to maybe pull the top of this over a little bit. Or likewise, do the same thing on the other trunk over here. But for the time being, this is about all the work this tree needs, and it can now go back on the table for winter, and I can look forward to working on it again once it leaves out in spring. And that's a look at fall cleanup on red maple. Thanks.